So
Okay.
I am sitting with, I'm Bob Schwartz, I'm the Executive Director of ACEP, and I'm sitting with almost Dr. Michael Demolina, a few months away from completing his dissertation. And Michael is a licensed professional counselor, master's degree. He's one of our lead trainers for the EFT program. He's a DCEP, and he's a Qi Gong master. Michael is lives and breathes, and he's married to an acupuncturist. So he lives and eats and breathes
Qi.
Yeah. And so I thought we would just talk about some issues around energy psychology and Qigong, and who knows where it's going to end up. But Michael, thanks for being here. Thanks for visiting.
Very fun to be here. Thanks.
So we've talked about this issue of where does Qigong, and you have Qigong and Chinese medicine. You've got psychology, Western psychology. You've got energy psychology. How do you see these things fitting together or not fitting together? Where does Qigong fit? To what extent does Qigong, overlap with energy psychology? Where does it not? What is your take on that? I mean, I realize there are many different takes on these things.
There are a lot of ways this conversation could go, but let's start with the word Qi. Right, so QI in the current pinyin system of Chinese transliteration. So if you and I were sitting down and having a Western science conversation about the word energy, maybe we would talk about bioelectricity, or we would talk about the biofield of the body, and we would talk about many Latin root word ending ways of describing, from a Western point of view, what did we mean by energy. But for the sake of this conversation, let's take a look at the Chinese word qi.
Okay.
So the radical for the word qi, radicals that the Chinese language is ideograms, that they're really ideas written in symbols.
Right.
And each one of them can be traced back to like an artistic drawing. So the word qi is actually representative of a stovetop. And underneath the stovetop is a bowl of rice. And above the stovetop is a symbol that looks kind of like a wispy piece of steam coming from the stove. And so when we think of the Chinese meaning of the word qi, we get a sense that it's something that's nourishing, that's nurturing, like eating a bowl of rice after a hard day of work. And we have a sense of energy as that which can barely be seen or detected, like the steam of the rice being cooked within. And so then when we think of the word Qi Gong, okay, and I'll talk about the word Gong in another moment, but we have a sense of like that there's something happening within us when we are doing energy work, or oftentimes in our tradition we would say energy cultivation, that we're actually cultivating something like a gardener would cultivate the vegetables in her garden. So something that's nurturing, nourishing, something that's happening within, that's developing an energy, like steam, that's kind of coming up in the body and warming us, spiritually speaking, energetically speaking, psychologically speaking, warming us as we connect and the steam rises to that which is above. All of those ideas are just contained in that one ideogram of what we kind of almost offhandedly say, oh, it's energy, right? And then coming from Alaska...
Talk about ethnocentric thinking,
yeah.
Right? I mean, like,
right.
I mean, you're saying, I had no idea you were going to go there. We've had a bunch of conversations about this. You've never said that ever before, which blows my mind. And I'm just sitting there going like, oh my gosh, we just, like, just how Western am I? So, continue,
And so then the word Gong is actually what many of us, if we ever saw the 1970s TV show Kung Fu, it's actually, the Gong is the Kong of Kung Fu.
Right.
And so from a Chinese perspective, again, if we look at the ideogram, it has the radical for time, and it has the radical, the idea of the sun rising and setting each day. And so there's a sense of work or exercise that occurs as the sun rises and the sun sets, and it's something that we do each day for the sake over time, over a lifetime of cultivation. So Qi Gong has all of these ideas just represented simultaneously within the word.
So you know what I'm thinking from our previous conversation that you
What's
just
that?
said about it's Qi, energy.
Yes, and over time.
Over time.
Yes, and it fits really nicely into Dan Siegel's work.
Mind is the flow of information, controls the flow of information and energy. And it's cultivated.
Yes.
So cultivation means that you do something with it, it evolves, it changes, it grows.
It transforms.
Over time.
So again, that sense of the nurturing, that which nurtures us being cooked, is that our own body, mind, spirit complex is the stove, right? Is the cauldron, in which the transformation of energy is occurring, because we're paying attention to it.
So let me go somewhere with your, that popped in. In the Enneagram, which we had planned on talking about, there's this idea of things which the Enneagram, for those that don't know, is it's a typology of typology system of personality. But according to at least Risso's version of it, people can evolve up, get better, transform and become more evolved, and they can de-evolve. They can go down. So I'm just curious, since you're mentioning transform, cultivate, within this Qi Gong system, is there the notion that things can transform and get better, but gardens can also grow into disrepair?
Well, it's a tradition that gave birth to the concept of yin and yang. And we could talk probably for hours just about what is yin and yang, but the part that relates to your question is there is an ascendance and a descendance of energy. Different from the Western perspective, because I think from the Western or even Judeo-Christian perspective, there's a value on ascendance or a value on enlightenment, but perhaps not as much value on the descendance. But if we were to take a look
at... You mean, but descendance is in bringing down.
The bringing down of energy, right?
To manifest.
And so from...
Which is different than becoming decrepit.
Which is different than becoming decrepit, because from the indigenous point of view of all the First Nations of the world, they're far more earth-based, and they're far more nature-based. So ascendance, we could say, is a toward heaven movement. And this is from a Taoist perspective, and Taoism is the grassroots philosophy of ancient China that gave rise to Oriental medicine, which is the mother of Qi Gong, which we could also say is a progenitor of energy psychology, right? And so we have an ascendance, but then we also have the other energy, which is the descending back toward the earth. So one way of understanding yin and yang is that there is sacred masculine, the heaven-yang energy, or heavenly father, father in heaven, father sky, and there is Mother Earth and Mother Nature and Gaia concept in relationship to each other. So the cauldron, which is our body, mind, spirit complex, is the place that we are mixing the cosmic and earthly energies within ourselves for health and healing.
Oh, where to go from here? So many places, so many interesting questions you've raised. So, let me ask you this, because I've been wanting to ask you this. You mentioned Taoism. And this has come up, I think, in terms of this has come up in a lot of places. So there's energy psychology, and for that matter, acupuncture. As a technology. Very Western kind of. You got pain, stick it in lung 3 or whatever it is.
There can be very technical, protocol driven
points, And then there is a more, if you will, the philosophical way of being in the world. Maybe, and I wanted to ask you about Taoism. And to what extent energy psychology as a practice, we don't talk about Taoism a whole lot. Per se, but I'm wondering from where you sit, how do you see Taoism? Maybe encapsulate some of the basic principles of Taoism in 2 minutes, and how you think that might inform or either does inform or perhaps should inform what we're doing here in ACEP and energy psychology in general?
Well, the first sentence in the Tao of Qi Gong, which is the text of Taoism, says that the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. And so it means that anything I could possibly say isn't really going to be accurate.
Fair
and
enough.
that's the first qualification of any discussion of Tao.
Fair enough. Which is, by the way, you also get that in, say, in the Hebrew, I'm blocking
the unnameable.
the
Yes.
unnameable aspect of God.
Yes.
What am I thinking of? The different aspects. It's
The Sephirot.
The Sephirot, right?
Yeah.
What's this called? This is
The Kabbalah.
The Kabbalah. Thank you very much. Yeah, in Kabbalistic.
Let me teach you your tradition.
Yeah, thank you. But in Kabbalistic tradition, right?
Yes.
There's the things you can talk about spirit and God, and then there's beyond which, forget it. You just can't even go there.
Right.
So I think even that's
that the human mind is incapable of comprehension at a certain point.
At some point.
Yes.
So with that said,
and then to also then be clear that when I speak around Taoism, I'm not referring to the religious versions that have more recently been evolved over the last, let's say, 1,000 years.
Okay.
But instead, I'm referring to what's called philosophical Taoism, which pre-existed any of the religious systems, going back 3,000 to 5,000 years. So it's more of a philosophy or way of living life in a holistic way, rather than what is currently evolved. So what we could say is that philosophical Taoism most often uses the metaphor of water to describe the way that the universe works. And there are many different sayings in the Tao of Qi Gong, which, for instance, says that the Tao is like water. It finds the lowest point possible, the place that people abhor to live, meaning that the river or the watercourse way moves down into a place of humility, and that is why it's the greatest thing, the greatest or largest thing. So it's like a path of humility, and it's always talking about course ways, waterways, water courses, etc. And so the primary metaphor of health and wholeness becomes an understanding that that which is the healthiest is in flow state, and that the only definition of pathology, again, whether it's physical, intellectual, emotional, or spiritual, or, of course, energetic, to use that word, is a state of blockage or stuckness. And, of course, that's something that any therapist, psychologist, change worker, life coach watching this can relate to, that we all have our ways of helping, but ultimately we're co-creating with our clients around the very point where they got stuck.
So, as you're saying that, I'm wondering, has anybody ever tried to kind of I don't know, transpond or whatever what Freud said, cathexis, stuck energy into Taoist thought?
Right. Well, Freud gets a bum rap, doesn't he? But if one were to actually read the original...
He's the original energy psychologist, you could make an argument.
He actually got a lot right, especially in Civilization and its discontents.
Yeah, he got a lot right until... there are certain issues he got wrong, but...
Sure, but the idea of libidinal energy, at least he's referencing something, and he's referencing flow states and stuck states in his own language pattern.
Right.
But he's talking about being stuck and what needs to occur in order to unstick it.
It'd be fascinating to kind of, because he was also stuck in, I guess, Victorian Europe.
Oh, sure. Product of his times and his place.
But it'd be interesting to imagine what would, if Freud were Chinese, what would he have said? Wouldn't that be, I mean, I'm just like, how would he have called it libidinal states? Like, what would be, why is he, why use that metaphor? Why refer to sexuality? Libido. Well, maybe that's not even totally fair.
If we could create a fun video that says Sigmund meets Lao Tzu, they would have a lot in agreement. For instance, the idea that part of the energy is sexual in nature,
Right.
Or we could say, like using a yoga chakra kind of way of talking about energy, we could say it's lower chakra energies.
Right.
In Oriental medicine, we have the three treasures, which are all ways of describing qi, and it's Jing qi, which does include sexual energy, creative energy. You think about all the lower chakra energies. It's survival energy, and then it's also, like from a biochemical point of view, all the endocrine systems, all the biochemistry of the body is included as Jing qi. And then there's what we would call qi, or the electromagnetic field of the body. And then there's shen, which is spirit. And so when an Oriental medicine physician, acupuncturist, or Qi Gong practitioner is talking about the three treasures, yet again, they're talking about a transformative relationship between the three, that they're connected.
Right.
And the reason, the purpose of activating Qigong energy exercises, which I personally include tapping and chakra balancing and so forth within the school of Qigong, is to move the baser energies like Jing Qi, kind of like a refinery, and that we are refining them within the cauldron of our system, and we're raising the vibration from the more base element to the electromagnetic element, ultimately to the spiritual element.
Could you also maybe suggest maybe it's also the other way around? That at least in this culture, we spend, in the Western culture, there's a lot of energy spent on saying how lots of stuff is wrong. Sex is wrong, anger is wrong, repress it, don't be it, don't express it. And the irony is the more you suppress, the more it, expresses in some bizarre way. So I don't know how that would fit from a Qigong perspective, but it seems to me, at least, a lot of what I do is help people feel, hey, it's normal for you to have these feelings. I mean, accept them, allow them to flow, because, and then, then it becomes no big deal after a while, then you can evolve it. You can't. A lot of people. There's a spiritual bypass.
Yes.
In fact, I did a TAT session with someone who was doing spiritual. I mean, she even got that she was doing spiritual bypass.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, she totally got it.
Yeah.
And it was because, like, oh, I'm, God, I'm not angry, not me.
I've forgiven everyone.
I forgive everybody. Yeah. Okay. Right. You know.
We are all one.
Right. And so it's like part of it was like doing a TAT thing, even though I'm, or even though I'm really angry.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're angry today, right now. 30 seconds from now, if you didn't fight it so much, maybe you could let it go. But you can't let it go before you accept it.
So I think the greatest models of spiritual mastery that many of us are honored to meet are our children. And so the greatest model of emotional health is actually the toddler who is associated to their emotional state before we've socialized them out of it.
Back to civilization.
Right, exactly.
Right, exactly.
And so, a toddler that can say, one of the things I remember my 4-year-old telling me once when he was displeased with me, he said, "Dad, you're not a Demolina anymore." And I said, "Oh, I've just been terminated from the entire clan." And then, of course, within 2 minutes, "Dad, I love you so much."
Right.
But in that sense, that's emotional health, because that's a free flow expression of energy.
Right.
As many of us use.
Eric Byrne called it the free child.
Right. Emotion, energy in motion.
Right.
But there isn't a repression.
Right.
So then, of course, as good parents, we know, well, my beloved child can't exist with that level of intensity and that level of honesty. So we start to socialize them into etiquette.
Right.
And of course we know we have to, but the real trick is being able to have a place of integrity with emotions while simultaneously being able to have a interpersonal relationship with each other in a way in which we can all continue to get along.
This is so much fun. Are you kidding? I think.
Okay, so we're back on a new camera.
That's right.
So where were we?
Well, there were so many different ways that conversation could have gone earlier, but then I was thinking I hadn't really given a very good definition of Tao.
Okay.
And it sounds, and oftentimes people refer to it as if it's this mystical force of the universe or something like that. But it's not any kind of mystical force as much as it is, in its literal sense, if we were in Beijing or Shanghai and we were to ask a local, where can I find the Tao? They would walk you to the closest street intersection and they would point you to the street sign because Tao means street. And so when the ancients were talking about the Tao, they were talking about the path, or oftentimes it's translated into English as the way.
Which, of course, has Christian...
It also has followers of the way.
Right.
The early Christians referred to themselves in that way.
Right.
But so it's really saying that there is a certain manner or method that the universe rolls itself out, and that the path of the wise person is simply to flow
with the universe,
with the way things are going to go, right?
Right.
And that going back to one of your earlier questions about what is stagnation can now be represented by someone who's repressing or depressing their emotional state or their past personal history. They're fighting the way.
The way. Right.
And that really is the origin point of emotional discomfort. So it comes back to an understanding of a radical acceptance and a radical responsibility towards the way things are happening in our lives and ownership of them.
So, well, that gets to another question that we've discussed and I've brought up numerous times, bringing it back to, say, EP Central.
Mm-hmm.
So some people will, I've got a problem, I'm going to tap on it to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I get rid of this traumatic memory, get rid of some painful experience. I guess that there's clearly benefit to that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, maybe it's the intention, like, are you doing it to... Well, so there's a couple of things. One is, there's a technology of that, or the Western way of that. Then there's another question about, well, okay, but what if you're tapping to get rid of the problem. Meanwhile, your entire way you conduct your life is perhaps not in accordance with the way, whatever that might mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think maybe one could use really tapping or anything as a way to extend the ability to work 80 hours a week? Which really, is that what the way is about? Is that really the natural flow? I don't know. I'm just asking. There's a question.
So I'll work my way backwards in the question. It may be the natural path, or if I may use the word karma, that some people have a mission, a felt mission in life, and they are so unified with their vocation and their avocation that 80 hours a week is kind of
not a problem.
Right, who they are because they're doing their soul work.
Right.
Now, that's probably not the vast majority of people, but I would want to give an allowance for someone who has found their path in that way.
Right.
Right? That there is
right.
no one cubbyhole that we could put all people in regard to, because the idea is that each one of us has a spiritual opportunity to pursue our Tao, and each individual has their own individual path.
So it would not be, we're not going to say there is one way, like there is the Kubler, the 5 steps too, which is not really totally accurate, or there are certain maybe general ideas, like it's probably not a good idea to shoot people in the head or, walk into fire. But you're saying if certain people, it might be fine to work 80 hours a week because it's what you love, it's your passion, and for you it's just, but for somebody else it would be terrible.
If it's truly their path,
right?
Yes. And then we, as therapists, could say, well, but is it a workaholism?
Right.
Well, we could say kind of a good definition of addiction being thrown in here, that we could
Since
find...
you are an addiction specialist.
I'm also a master addiction counselor, right?
Right.
So we could say that we could use that definition of addiction that says any behavior that a person uses to cover up their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, and their process is addictive in nature, or what's now being called process addictions, behavioral addictions, right? It doesn't always have to be chemical in nature per se. So that could be a litmus test between someone who's really living their soul's purpose, versus someone who is frankly running away from their own process by obsessing on the other kinds of behavioral addictions. So a model that we could use is the presupposition that people are born into the world essentially spiritually perfect. But what happens is a series of bumps and bruises and trials and tribulations in a very imperfect world, or what Bessel van der Kolk calls the small t traumas and the big T traumas.
I thought I said that.
Well, maybe Bessel got it from you.
I don't know. Anyway.
So, what I think about is just kind of like that perfect diamond. And it's reminiscent a little bit of the Buddhist Diamond Sutra, yeah? That there's this perfect diamond that comes into the world, but then the imperfect world happens to the perfect diamond. You know what I mean? It happens. And then ego defense mechanisms have to kick in to protect that purity, right? And one layer of ego defense mechanism and another, and all of the behaviors that we learn, that we all learn on how to protect ourselves from pain and from discomfort, whether it's physical, emotional, or what have you. And we layer it on and layer it on over the course of childhood, adolescence, early adulthood. Every time there's a pain, a deep pain, there's another ego defense mechanism that layers itself in. Just the crud of the world. So getting back to your question, when someone says, I want to remove it, the real question here is, remove what? So in my paradigm, or this kind of Taoist, Buddhist way of looking at things, we're removing things that were never originally part of our essence. We're removing those ego defense mechanisms, those behaviors, those protections that were layered on as a result of surviving our world. So the removal is fine. And then, of course, you know what very sophisticated people do with all of that mud and muck. They take lipstick and they draw a perfect pink cloud of lipstick all around it so that it looks really, really good. You know, like workaholism, for instance, or seeming good in front of others. Because we're afraid that if they find out about my muck, then they will judge me and not like me. So I'm going to even put on one last layer of perfectionism around it. So here's a distinction, because I would say part of the Western paradigm would then pass a value judgment around, this person is, bad, or the addiction is bad, or the behavior is bad, and so forth. But from a Taoist or energetic point of view, at least from the Taoist Oriental medicine point of view, it's more about removing that which never belonged to our soul identity. People come into the world as a diamond, and the more they remove that muck, the more the light
of the diamond.
The light which isn't of the diamond, but it can shine through the diamond and refract onto all of our other relationships into the world.